What's going on, guys? Magdallan here. I tried to make a Strength Stacker Chieftain Ball Earthquake meme build, and it was a disaster. We spent a bunch of currency, wasted a bunch of time, but we did learn a few things. So I'm going to share what I did learn, and we're just going to do a little story time and go over the whole process. So if all of that interests you, hit that like and subscribe button and stick around. Alright, so in the background here I've just got footage where I'm hovering over all the gear, but I figured first thing we'll just go over is what I paid for all the stuff. So the flasks I borrowed from my other builds, so I'm not going to include those. I paid 40x for the boots, I paid 5x for the gloves, the weapon I paid 1x for because it had good rolls, the chest piece I recombinated myself, but I bought a base that had explode for 120c, which I lost. The shield was about 60c, the amulet 15x. The flame and flesh jewels that you can't see in this footage were 1x a piece. The rings, the one with the strength implicit, was 18x, and the other one I borrowed from my TS character. I paid 10x for that one, but it's worth more now. The headhunter is about 53x now, but I paid 74 at the time that I bought it. And the helmet was effectively free. So, let's jump into some map footage here. I don't want to belabor the skill tree or the ascendancy points very much because of how poorly the build performed. I would say don't try and recreate this. I went for the concept being strength stacking with full fire conversion, life regen, and then I was trying to get as much AoE into the build as I could, and all of that stuff seemed to work. It's just the damage scaling was not there, and the defensive options that were available were just laughably bad in comparison to something like the Inquisitor, which is an ascendancy I'm more familiar with playing. As you can see, I mean, we are killing the mobs, and I did take the build into a 60% delirious map, and it did clear it. I didn't fail any of the content I tried once I had gear set up, but I think that's down to you struggle your way through the first few packs, and then Headhunter is carrying. But for most builds that I have played, if they're passable, then Headhunter makes them amazing. Headhunter, all it can do is make it so that you can kill the mobs with this build. You're still slow. You're still using Earthquake, which I knew was a mistake, but I didn't realize how catastrophic of a mistake it is. The wind-up time is hilariously bad, and the current way that the game is set up, that's just a recipe for disaster to a degree that I was not prepared for when I was setting the build up. My fantasy of the Giga Earthquake Explosion tank that stands in the middle of the 100% Delirious packs and then pushes Earthquake once and blows everything up. Maybe that's possible if you pick a different ascendancy. You do much, much, much more investment. You spend quite a bit more time than I was willing to spend. I don't know if that's possible or not, but here we can see another problem, which is look at this single target. For me, that's unplayable. Unplayable. And that's coming from a guy that routinely plays RF and makes guide videos about RF where people are commenting, classic ZDPS build, and so if I'm saying the single target is bad enough that it's unplayable, that should be a pretty good indicator that it's truly awful. And the other thing is there just wasn't, I had already done all the stuff, right? So if I wanted to get more strength, you're talking huge investment. If I wanted a better weapon, I basically couldn't find any. I found a few like meme items, but if you wanted to do one-hander, it seems like the lead sprinkler was the right choice. Anyway, like I said, I don't want to belabor all of that. I've already begun selling off the gear, like I'm moving on. The reason I'm making this video is because the other stuff that I learned I think was more valuable than the build itself. But just because I did take the time, I figured I would at least go over the gear that I bought and show you guys a little bit of the map footage. But it was pretty awful. And the Crystal MTX for Earthquake actually doesn't look very cool at all. I thought that it was going to. So I was disappointed about that. And just everything about the build feels bad. So let's go back to the hideout, and I will log on to a real character, and we will blast a map or two, and I'll talk about my general experience. So as a content creator, I think the main lesson that I learned was I shouldn't spend a bunch of time on a project that isn't going to work, because then I'm only going to be able to make a cautionary tale video where I tell you about that failure, and it's not going to have a whole lot of actual utility for you guys. If I had just made a build guide for another established build that has, 3 to 5% minimum utilization in the league, I think that would have just been better for everybody concerned. I would have enjoyed the process more. It would have been more useful for you guys. It would have been faster. It probably would have been less expensive, so on and so forth. Or I could have taken this build and invested more. I could have done some crafting stuff and tried to learn more about that to share with you guys. I feel like this was sort of the least efficient use of the currency that I had that I could have done from the perspective of being a content creator. I think it would have even been better if I had just bought some cards and gambled them, because if I had doubled my money or tripled my money or some crazy shit, then I forgot I was doing that delirium. If I had just bought some cards and made a shitload of money, then I could have done other projects or invested in exploring other league mechanics like Expedition or something to start ramping up towards being able to make guide content for those mechanics. And so I think that was a mistake on my part. Another thing is the build just wasn't fun to begin with. But basically, as soon as I put the gear on, opened the first map, I knew, like, oh, I don't enjoy this. And so I think the purchase all the gear first and make the build and then put all the gear on before you played it is a horrific idea when you're trying to make a meme build or an untested theory craft thing. And while I guess the reason that I probably made that mistake is because I was overconfident because of how well that strategy turned out in the end when I was playing Tornado Shack, as I'm still playing. And so that's another point. And I will say, to switch gears slightly, I was surprised that what I would consider to be just from like a thematic and fantasy standpoint, I would consider Earthquake to be the strength skill.
You destroy that which
and
you cannot control.
I would have thought that at the level of investment that I had with the value of strength that I had on the character and having 2 sources of added damage for strength and scaling all the fizz and fire conversion and all of that stuff, you would have thought that that would have just been better at a baseline. Just period, full stop. And I don't understand exactly why that's the case, because and maybe that is one thing that I can take away from this that has value, is that I understood that slam skills and melee in general is in a bad spot, but I had only ever played those things years ago, and so I didn't understand exactly how big the gulf is in both the damage scaling, the defensive scaling, and the fluidity of the characters. I didn't understand how big that gulf is between that and something like Tornado Shot or even RF.
This one's going to hurt.
And so that was kind of eye-opening. I won't be doing this again. That's my big takeaway, is that I think that another mistake that I made was that I sort of disregarded the learning that I had done over the last couple leagues, and I have become pretty confident in being able to make currency and complete projects, take an established build idea and then add or change it around a little bit to fit my particular play style. And I think that is because there are ample resources for research already created for most of those ideas. And so for me, the part that's fun is I know that there's a baseline that works, and then I get to go, scour a bunch of different people's guides and read up on the topic, and then decide like, well, I know what I have to do at a baseline to get this thing working, but I'd rather have a little bit less damage and have explode, or I'd rather have more damage and use a headhunter and not worry about the defensives as much. And I didn't really have that opportunity with this because I was locked into, I'm making the build, I'm coming up with the tree, I'm finding all the items. I asked a bunch of people for their input, but I didn't, it just wasn't the same as when I was putting together a more traditional build. Yes, we could talk about, oh, I think you should do this, or this might work, or that might work, but that's not the same as, looking at videos of guys playing a very similar build, or reading 10 different guides and noticing the similarities, or having 30, 40 people or whatever on POE Ninja that are all running that type of build at a high level where you can look at the gear choices they're making. And I enjoy having those resources. So maybe that's one thing that you could take away from this if you're in a position where you have a bunch of currency and you're thinking like, okay, maybe, it's been going pretty well, so maybe I'll just try and make up a build with a shitty skill and dump 100x into it and see if I can get something going. Maybe just reconsider and try setting a more gameplay-oriented goal, like doing challenges or maximizing the build that you're on, or getting into some kind of a crafting situation. I feel like at a certain point, I had made 2 builds that I was happy with. I had made guides that I was happy with, and I felt compelled to just make another build because I had kind of said that I was going to. And ultimately, I think next league I will do mostly the same that I did this league for the first 2 characters, and then when we get to this point in the league, I think the focus is going to switch to either high investment currency making strategies to fund the final upgrades for builds, or more beginner user content, that type of thing. I think that I will leave the meme build creation to people who really enjoy the thrill of victory juxtaposed with the crush of defeat in that sense. So I don't have a whole lot more to add at this time. I do have another video in the works with the Tornado Shot character. We're going to get into some high investment late league farming, as I just alluded to a moment ago. And so I hope that despite the fact that this didn't end up being a traditional build showcase type thing, we more or less just kind of hung out for a little bit and chatted about the experience. But nonetheless, I hope that there was 1 or 2 things of value that I was able to share in here. And so, yeah, if you made it all the way to the end, I do appreciate it. And please do hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video. Appreciate you.